Okay, it has turned the hour. I say we start on time. So everybody, welcome to the CBOR working group session at IETF 122, just as it says up on the screen. Let's see how this clicker thing works. Oh, yes. Note the note well. You've all seen this many times before, but pay attention to it nonetheless. It's important. And equally important is the conduct stuff. Behave well, especially when you disagree. So I'm going to leave that up for a bit. I'd like to see people staring at the screen. You can be thinking of anything you like, but please look at the screen. Okay. So you all know this by now also. Please use the, we have a lot of people doing remote this time, so please use the on-site tool to get in the queue if you're in the room. Meet Echo for the win. Okay, the agenda. We did the first item. Introduction, note well, etc. Document overview comes next, where we're just going to look quickly at the documents that we're not discussing today. Then we'll discuss packed CBOR for 10 minutes, DNS CBOR for 10 minutes, and use the rest of the time for the EDN literals document. And then we have any other business where I'll remind everybody about the interim calls, and we'll see if there's anything else we need to say. Christian, would you like to say anything before we get started?
There's one thing that I'd like to ask around, that is, we don't have a minute taker present yet. I can certainly help a bit from remote, but it would be good to have someone in the room to
we do have Marco in the room, and he is doing his usual.
Okay, I just didn't see him. Thank you.
Taking notes for us.
Thanks, I just didn't see that.
Yes. Okay. So that's it for the chair slides. The next thing up is document overview. Christian or Karsten, which of you wants to take that?
Well, I didn't prepare that, I'm sorry.
All right, is there anything we want to say about the documents that are not being discussed explicitly today?
Yeah, right now the CDE document is in working class call, so that ends in about 10 days, if I remember correctly. So if you are into deterministic representation, you want to have a look there. And I have promised to make some proposals there, and we'll do that, but probably not during this week. So it will only be the last week of the last call I will be doing this.
Okay. All right, so Karsten, let's get your slides set up.
There's one thing that I'd like to add here. Given that we've only had interim meetings, thanks to the authors and all the reviewers, we have published 2 RFCs since the last meeting. If I count correctly, that is updates to the CDDL grammar and the additional control operators. Thanks for that.
Okay. So Karsten, you ought to be able to kick your own slides off.
So interesting. Now I get the change deck. Okay. Good. So we have 10 minutes to talk about packed CBOR, and I just wanted to remind people where we are, and then ask essentially one question, which I have a couple of slides for. So packed CBOR is not data compression, which is probably the shortest description you can have for it. It's using the structure that is in CBOR data items to enable some in-call decompression during accessing a data item, which is something that has been become a bit popular in certain circles under the term succinct data structures. And I'm not going to go into the theory behind that, but that's what CBOR PACT does. So it is really useful if you have a data item that has a lot of redundancy, and you can operate with this redundancy without actually needing to run a decompression. And to do this, we actually have a number of tags defined and a number of symbol values defined in this document. We had a working class call on a previous version of this document about 3 years ago. So that was completed. But then we had quite a bit of implementation work, various hackathons, including for last IETF. And we also had some new concepts that swept in and needed some explanation how they interact with what CBOR PACT is. So this is what the -14 is. So the one remaining question I think we actually have to address is about the consumption of tags. But before I go to this question, I just wanted to say this stuff is being picked up. It is being picked up by documents that want to make use of it by adding to its table setup site, like the draft from Christian I'm pointing to here. But there are also other documents that want to actually use this, and one of those we'll hear about in 10 minutes. So this is the background, and now on to the tag consumption issue. So I have been using this little tool regularly in the last 5 years or so for watching how we are using up our tag resources. You can have a really large number of tags in CBOR, but only some of them are actually very efficient. And very efficient is, of course, something that a packed mechanism would want to use. So in particular, we are looking at the 1+1 space. I think it's pretty clear that we need one 1+0 tag. I don't think anybody has made a proposal that would get around that. But the question is, how many 1+1 tags do we need? And we see we have 158 of these tags free. We have used up 74. So I'm always saying that we have to do this for decades. And Rohan actually said maybe even more decades than I had in mind. So I had 30 years in mind. He mentioned 50 years. But I think the order of magnitude is right. And if you look at the free tags, this means we can have a consumption rate of maybe 3 1+1 tags per year. We haven't quite managed to do this for the initial set of tags, which is kind of obvious when you furnish a new apartment, then you have to buy a sofa, and these sofas are in the 74 tags that have been used in the last 11 years. So we have approximately we have consumed 7 tags per year, and I think the designated experts are very aware that we have to throttle this down. So on one hand, we are in a tag saving mode right now, and on the other hand, we have this draft that is actually quite on the side of taking some ground here. So that's really the question, how do we curate the tag resource? And the fun thing about the discussion is there is no right answer. So this is all very much about estimation and valuing things from a certain perspective. And of course, we know that people in the working group have different perspectives. So that's where we are coming from. And what we right now have in the document is the proposal to use up 40, which is about a quarter of the remaining 1+1 tags. And as I said, one 1+0 tag, but again, I don't think that is under discussion right now. And I want to discuss two approaches. One is just reducing the number. This number is really tunable. So before we finally register these tags, we can set this number to any value. And I have one obvious proposal for 16+8, which is going from 40 to 24. And I have a maybe not so obvious answer for going to 0, which requires some changes in the document beyond just setting the tunable, but which also can be done at the cost of some efficiency. So let's talk about the radical idea. The radical idea is to get rid of using tags for the argument references, which is one of two kinds of references that we have in CBOR. Get rid of the use of tags, of additional tags there completely. Just have tag 6 on an array with 2 elements, where one is the number of the item in the table, the position in the table, and the second is the argument with which we want to do something here. So usually we concatenate things in the table with things that are given as an argument. So that is pretty obvious. This is simple. It's really nice. I mean, the person in me who wants to do nice and neat things really is nicely addressed by this. But it also has a cost, because the array head we are adding to the encoding will use up slightly more than 1 byte per argument reference in benchmarks I have run. So this really is a trade-off here. Do we spend some 24 or 40 tags? I haven't done the number for 24, but it will not be that different in the specific benchmark here. Or do we go for this radical reduction and conserve tags for other useful things? So this is essentially the question I'm putting up here. For reduced, there is no obvious target. I'm just saying 16+8. The plus here is this is 16 straight references and 8 inverted references. So the tag references differ in the order of the components that go into the operation, like concatenation. So since there is no correct number, this really comes down to haggling. The radical approach definitely is the more conservative approach, but it is missing on some of the optimization that is otherwise available. Okay, so let me just go 2 slides back to show the alternatives, and maybe we can open the mic now.
Hi, Carsten. This is Rowan. I really like the radical reduction. I have a question about deployment. Like, if we did the radical reduction as a default, would we be able to introduce like, here we decided we're going to use 8 1+1 or 16 or 32 1+1 tags later, if we see that there's a lot of deployment of packed later?
Yes. So the radical reduction gives you a way to address these argument references, and we can add tags. We're probably not going to remove the ways to address these references during while adding the other tags. So we will have some redundancy. There are some code points that suddenly are no longer useful. So I would prefer to avoid that, but we can add tags later. Yes, that's a very good point.
Okay, Maria.
Yeah, Maria Bert Sinek. I'd like to say probably the maybe reduced may work for us well, but looking at the overall consumption, which we would use in encoding lots of things, I would say in the end the radical reduction and maybe reduced has basically no difference because we'll anyway use much more of tags, or let's say we'll actually use many more of those back references, those inverted references, than just was the count 24 or 25 plus 16, which is a 40. No, we are going to use like thousands. So for me, the question is more like, are we able to have a tag which would do it maybe a little bit different way, or something like a meta tag, tagging a tag, like saying the next tag in this, let's say the tag number, I don't know, it's six, would say there is the next tag, and that's just the inverted reference or something like that.
Yeah, I think we could design a lot of additional mechanism here. I would prefer to still keep this relatively simple. So that's why my radical reduction proposal is not actually doing that. But I really want to comment here on the differences in perspective. So you say we might have tables with 1,000 entries, and I think that's actually something that certain applications of CBOR will have, because they just have predefined tables and want to pick out of those. And that's one perspective. There is the constrained node perspective, where we will usually mostly use these 1+1 tags, the 1+0 and 1+1. And then, of course, there are other applications like doing an SBOM, where we will have large numbers of tags as well, but also can identify some table entries that are much more likely than other table entries. So we have good use for a 1+1 space. So we have different applications, different perspectives. And of course, we now could apply for a 3-year PhD grant and look at all these. But on the other hand, it would be nice to actually be able to use this.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
Okay. So we have some feedback. People like the radical approach, but yeah, we don't really have numbers at this point in time. We probably have to look at ways for getting some reasonable benchmarks in place to decide this. Okay, the next item on the agenda is not mine. Sorry, that was wrong. Martin.
Should I just use that?
So, yeah, got that. Let me turn this over to the clicker. It's been done. Okay.
Martin, will you use the slides clicker, or do you use your phone?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Do you use the slides clicker, or do you use your phone?
I use a clicker.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Martin. I'm talking about concise object representation of DNS messages again. So first I will recap our motivation and our objectives and give an update on the draft and then go into the next steps that we have planned. So respectively 2 pull requests that are open. So our motivation is to have concise DNS messages in constrained networks. You can see here an example message where we basically reduce the message size by half. And you can see where this goes to, but if you are really interested, you can read the draft and see where all the values go. The objectives are that we want to provide a concise packet format for compressed names and addresses in DNS queries and replies by using an existing implementation, CBOR. And we want to encode the DNS messages in CBOR, omit redundant DNS fields in the DNS queries and responses, and an easy to implement name compression for, with on-the-fly construction, and address and value compression using packed CBOR as an optional compression tool. Since last IETF, we addressed some YANA reviews to provide a preliminary content format. Those are not expert reviewed yet, so I hope that's okay that I took them. I think we already talked about this at the last meeting, and then some minor editorial changes. The big changes actually then come in the next steps. There's the GitHub pull request number 6, which adds a capability to summarize resource record sets, and the GitHub pull request number 7, which makes name compression based on packed CBOR. So for the capability of summarized resource record set, we have introduced basically this flag in the R data, which is a Boolean, which when it is set to true, when it's set to true, you can instead send a list of multiple R datas so that you can summarize resource records to a set, which is useful if you want to sign them, for example, with DNSSEC. But also it is useful to reduce the size of the message even more, because then you don't have to send the type specs every time. And for the name compression, I want to shortly give a recap how currently name compression works, since what I presented at IETF 121. So basically, when we have a DNS message where we already see a name sequence, we can just replace this with a reference, for which we use currently a non-determined tag T. And we can do this basically also for all the suffixes of the name. And the question I posed at IETF 121, which tag should T be? Should we want to take a 1+0 tag, one of these very precious ones? Carsten talked about this already before. Or 1+1 tag, which would be more than an actual reference, would be in the DNS classic DNS message format, but we would use a less crowded real estate. And after the meeting in Dublin, we had the idea, Christian and I came up with that, could we use shared values instead, so that we just have this larger than 1 byte reference, like we do in PACT. And well, we looked at it, and I already put in the sort bubbles, which basically already form some kind of table, which we then called the virtual table packing table. And then we added some table setup tag, so that this virtual table is basically added implicitly to the message. And then we can just use packed CBOR, as I used from the draft there, to use simple references to reference this virtual packing table. And for application DNS plus CBOR, we can even make this table setup tag implicit, so that you don't have to send it with a message. And the answer then is yes, we can use this new implicit virtual table setup tag to use shared values for our compression. There are also some further optimizations. The leftover from the last IETF is that sometimes Punycode labels are shorter than UTF-8. Just look, for example, as Thai domain names. So maybe we could also then allow for Punycode in the domain names. So what do you think about that? And just to give a quick recap as a prelude to my question. So basically we opened this draft 2.5 years ago. Pretty quickly added packed CBOR support for that. Then as we went and new venues got open, we added new features from the original DNS message format. At the end, we also allowed for structured air data and the name compression. And so we got to the current version. And so my question is, should DNS plus CBOR now, is it ready to be adopted for the CBOR working group?
Okay, comments? Michael.
Yes, please adopt it. I didn't realize it wasn't already. Question I wanted to ask, I'm sorry to ask the question here. Do you know what the effects of the changes to packed CBOR has on your wire efforts?
Since the so for the named compression, it doesn't have much effect because I only use a simple reference. So basically just a reference text. For the name compression, for the address compression with CBOR packed, which is an optional feature anyways, I don't think the impact of using either the radical approach or the non-so-radical approach are that big, because the bytes we gain by an address compression are already quite little. So because address compression, sorry.
You don't gain that much by packing in the first place. So the effect of 2 bytes or 3 bytes per tag is not that.
Yeah,
irrelevant.
I mean, we get a big advantage if there are multiple addresses in our message and multiple equal values. But then again, we also use normal references. But for the address compression, I don't think it's that big of a difference, I would say.
So chairs, yes, please adopt.
So if I can just quickly answer Michael's question. Using packed goes from a 2 or 3 byte reference to a 1 byte reference. So there is a little bit of improvement here.
Okay, we're running behind, so let's keep it short. Rowan.
Hi,
Michael, unmute.
So it does seem a little bit weird to me that we want to do this here, and I was just curious to what extent what the DNS folks said in their working groups in their area about doing most of this work there with, occasional experts from CBOR commenting, because I'm doing something with a lot of CBOR and Mimi and with a lot of CBOR and Spice, and they're not in this working group.
Yeah, I posed this question actually last time, and we said we want to stick with CBOR for now. So yeah.
What did the DNS folks say?
We sent passes by DNS Deer, and they were happy with the outcome so far. So yeah, as far as I understood it. Yeah.
Andy Newton, I will, I think, be your AD on Wednesday. So my question is going to be, where does this fit in the CBOR charter? And we don't have to have an answer now, but we do have to have an answer. So
The chairs will check that. Okay, Karsten, briefly.
Just very quickly on the question which working group to do this in. I think the important thing is to stay mutually informed. So make sure that events on this document are communicated both to this working group and to the appropriate DNS working group. On the other DNS document that we work on in core, we have gotten early reviews from DNS people, and the last call work was shared with one DNS working group, I forget which one. So that's really important. But this is very much about using CBOR in the best way to do DNS and not using DNS in the best way to use CBOR. So the expertise really is in this working group and not in the DNS working group.
Okay, so action item for the chairs to check the charter and issue a call for objections to adopting this. And let's move on to EDN. Thanks, Martin. Karsten, back to your slide, or is it Rowan's slides that we do next? Okay.
Well, I have some background slides which don't ask questions, but just explain what things are. Okay. And so I think Rowan's slides which get to specific questions should be after mine. And I hope mine will be pretty fast.
Okay. Karsten, you have slide control.
Thank you. Okay, I wrote a message to the mailing list yesterday that points to a background document that maybe is useful to understand what this document is about, because it has a certain amount of history. So when we did CBOR in 2013, we saw that we have to have a text-based format available in parallel to the binary-based CBOR format, and this is what became extended diagnostic notation at some point. So in all other parts of the CBOR ecosystem, we have extension points, which are a way for third parties to add things to the picture. We didn't have that in EDNs yet, even though EDN needs to represent information from another extension point, which is tags and symbol values in CBOR. So we had an obvious gap. We had a technical proposal, we implemented that, and so on. And then we had a working group last call, and around that, we got a little bit of mission creep here, because the literals document actually acquired the need to put in ABNF and roll up the base documents and so on. That was a lot of work, but we have done that. And now we are stuck in one specific point, which is not unimportant. So it's good that we spend some time on this, but it's a very specific point. And other documents like EDN EREF, which are already being used. Well, I see you. Let me just finish this one slide. So we have other work that is stuck behind this and would be enabled if we
and if we have other work that's stuck, why are we spending time talking about this history when this slide has been presented in every interim where we've discussed this and like the last 3 IETFs? Is there anyone in this room who hasn't seen this slide and doesn't understand this history?
Okay, let's go. Move on.
Okay, so the requirements for EDN are about humane presentation and keyboarding of CBOR data. So you can look at things, you can input things. We decided for a superset of JSON. First of all, it's a superset because CBOR is more than JSON, but also because we wanted to improve usability. So we spent some time in the last year to actually improve usability quite a bit. So let's talk about extensions for a second, because that is not something that is done in other ecosystems in the same way. The CBOR ecosystem is friendly to third-party extensions. So people come in, do their extensions, like define a new tag, and that becomes part of the CBOR ecosystem without necessarily requiring working group work or large amounts of vetting and so on. People can just register their tags and simple values and then go on with that. And we have a similar thing in CDDL where we have control operators. There are some 37 right now, I think. So doing an extension mechanism for EDN also would ask for being friendly to third-party extensions, in particular where they are follow-ons to tag registrations. And all these things are based on registries and not on working group last calls and so on. So there are three requirements that follow from this need for third-party extensibility. One is isolation. So adding a third-party extensibility extension must not destabilize the EDN base specification. That is on the specification level. We have a similar requirement on the implementation level. It must be possible to write an implementation. Not all implementations will do that, but it must be possible to write an implementation that can add extensions without destabilizing themselves or other extensions. So we are really looking at a bazaar style of evolution, which is very different from the cathedral style of evolution that IETF is famous for. And finally, permissionless innovation means we don't require total deployment to be able to use an extension. Extension should be usable even if not all libraries on the way that the data takes know it yet. So I think these are three important considerations to keep in mind. There's also another consideration which has to do with the specific problem that EDN actually addresses, which is that it is a language that is used in various environments, like operational environments, source code development environments, test data, and so on. So we really want to be able to work on EDN data with source code editors and apply revision control systems, which means Git these days. Yeah, we know that people are using Unicode in many places, but we also need to be able to work with a base repertoire, which conservatively still is ASCII printable plus new line. So that's a pretty important requirement that nobody ever said aloud, because JSON fulfills it and we're trying to be a JSON superset, but we have to make sure that we don't lose it by extending beyond JSON. And that means also that a function to automatically convert an EDN document to a base repertoire, to the base repertoire, and possibly even back, that's a little bit more complicated, should be part of the design requirements. So last slide. When we implement these extensions, these usually bring something to CBOR that lives outside CBOR, like having a date-time representation that is based on ISO 8601, or other things like that. So there may be application-specific libraries already out there that handle that data type. And what we want to make sure is that we don't require every extension to somehow neatly integrate into the way the base specification is built. Yeah, I think we really don't want to prescribe a specific implementation technique, and some really are isolated. So I have a URI library which I can use. I don't have ABNF for URIs that I actually think is true. We have the one from 3986 that we can use in a pinch. But yeah, I would like to keep this separate from my EDN implementation. But I also see that there are very good reasons to integrate some of these into the base ABNF. If you're building your implementation based on ABNF, you want to be able to integrate. So these are, it's just important that we keep the flexibility to do both of these. So that's all I wanted to say, and I think now we can go to Rohan's excellent slides.
Okay, Rohan, do you want to put your slides up? Yeah, here they are, and the clicker should.
Hey there. Okay, it's me, Rohan. I wanted to try and get some of these out a little bit more explicit. And Joe Hildebrand did a really nice job kind of writing up some issues on the HedgeDoc system, or the whatever HackMD system. Thank you. And so I kind of just, these slides are an attempt to translate that and some of the discussions that have been said on the list into a few slides. So briefly, the kinds of strings that are in EDN, we've got double quoted strings, we've got bare single quoted strings, and we've got app strings, which are single quoted strings with a alphanumeric prefix. The single quoted strings end up turning into binary strings, into strings of bytes instead of strings of text. Okay, so what do we agree on already? So we have consensus that it should be possible to define new app strings, that valid JSON should be valid EDN, that I think we have consensus that that editor code coloring should be able to find the beginning and end of every string in an EDN document. And that we have sort of conventional, like pre-existing this document being around, comments, both // comments and pound to the end of line comments inside of the hex B string, app string, and end of line comments in the B64 app string. I think we agree on that. Anybody object? Okay. Also, I think that we have consensus that in an extension that the app string needs to decide or define if there is a comment format or any comment format that they use, and that this might be a totally different style, like it might use C style or C++ style comments, which would be totally different than the ones that are currently in the document.
Michael Richardson, the mic. By the way, I discovered that there are some base 64 decoders that are intolerant of white space between base 64 quadruples.
Yeah.
Quadruples. So you can put a new line every 4 characters, but not there. And I wondered, you probably should clarify whether you were allowed to do that, whether that's expected to comment in the middle of the tuple.
I know that there are also base 64 encoders and decoders that are completely intolerant of any white space.
Well, there may be, they also won't tolerate comments, but all I'm saying is that if you want the two base 64s comment and 2 more, then we probably should write that, or it will get it wrong.
Okay, but I guess the question is,
but I agree
you want to have comments inside of B64 app strings because we did it in the past.
Yeah,
because there's stuff in the wild that does.
And don't surprise people by
changing that,
by making it only every 4 characters, because I got bitten by that, and I was like, what? But it tolerates new lines, not everywhere. Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. So then there are a few things that we don't agree on. And I think the big thing is what kind of escaping we want or need inside of particularly single quoted strings, but generally inside of strings. Any other quoting styles we may or may not need, and this sort of 1 level or 2 level BNF issue. But that's possibly the least important of these because it's more of a, like, it's how you write the BNF, not what you do as an implementer. Okay, so I think the easiest of this is double quoted strings. So I think we have consensus that we want to be compatible with JSON. So that means that we need to be able to support \u and a 4-digit
Unicode.
A thing from Unicode that is under, less than or equal to 10000. And you need 2 of these if you want to, if I have a high Unicode thing like the domino symbol, I might need to have 2/u things with 4 characters in JSON, but we want to be compatible with that. a question is if we want to also support this syntax that is currently in the document. And so to reword the question, do we want EDN double quoted strings that are legal, but are not legal in JSON? But I think that maybe that's not great, because I think if somebody has something that looks like it would be JSON, other than the fact that it has these comments, I don't think it's going to be super obvious that it's not legal JSON if it was legal EDN. But
So, Christian, you have a comment on that?
Christian, no head. I think it is important because Jason's way of doing proper Unicode, or like modern Unicode, is highly unintuitive, and the new version, kind of defining a new format, and that is already incompatible. I prefer to encode Unicode scalar values with a single escape rather than dancing around it.
okay, so I think what we'll do, maybe, I'll do a few slides and then we can maybe do some chair calls on some of these things. Like, I'm kind of okay with a lot of these choices. I just want us to make them explicit. And I think that the transcript calling proper unicorns was really funny. So for bare single quoted strings, so both Christian and I posted on the list that we don't like allowing /u encoding of printable ASCII characters, because it really can result in confusion attacks. It's unnecessary. So don't, I'm of the opinion we shouldn't allow h\u0065 LLO. You should just say hello. Now, there is an RFC out there that says we shouldn't use this bracket format. Joe and Karsten both said that it's much easier for Unicode characters, especially that are larger than 10,000. And that the reason in the draft that says you shouldn't do that is because it was a thing that Perl did that people implementing this are unlikely to be doing. So my thing is that I don't want to support both mechanisms in single quoted strings. I don't want to have both this format here with two /u's that don't have curly braces and a /u with curly braces in the same type of string. And I would be actually okay with having one type of string in double quoted strings because it's JSON compatible, and one in single quoted strings. But I don't like the idea of using the same letter with two different syntaxes. I think that is unintuitive and confusing. Anyone care to say they don't think it's contradictory? They like having both. I mean, at least in single quoted strings. Person.
Well, we don't have a really strong forward compatibility requirement in EDN. I mean, we don't want to do this just for fun, but we actually can outlaw things that are in EDN now in the EDN of the future, just as work for people, because we are not using EDN for actual interchange in that sense. Yeah, still, I'm not sure that I want people to have to edit their Unicode characters when they go from double quotes to single quotes. So yeah, there's a little bit of a non-starter for me. I think we should be compatible here, and I think we should actually, yeah, be as compatible between the two as possible.
Around that. So if, as Christian proposed, if we support the curly brace notation in double quoted strings, would you, and if somebody has a JSON, a JSON document, do you think that it's likely that they're going to need to turn that double quoted string into a single quoted string without redoing the encoding?
Yes.
Okay. So we have 3 different possibilities here and 3 different points of view. Okay. I'm going to continue with the app strings that are defined in the base draft. So this would be hex, space 64, IP, and date. So what escaping do we want for those? So again, Christian and I both proposed not doing /u encoding of printable ASCII. Joe asked, well, does that, how does that work inside of comments, for example? I think that because comments are going to be discarded anyway, it doesn't really matter if \u and something gets interpreted or doesn't get interpreted. As long as it gets correctly discarded as being inside of a comment, I think we're totally fine. Same question there. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I think the question is, do we ever end up with a situation where somebody does a / single quote and it doesn't end up being handed to whatever processes the app string as just a single quote? I think Christian is correct here that that the thing that receives the the output of an H app string, it doesn't get a if there's some place in there that has a single quote or a CRI app string, it doesn't get a / single quote, it just gets a single quote. Did that make sense? Sorry if that was confusing.
To me, it did.
Okay. All right. I think at least we seem to have consensus on this. Oh, sorry. Go
Well,
ahead.
I didn't
Chris.
understand this.
Okay. So if you have, say, CRI or sorry, if you had date, and the date has an apostrophe in the time zone, and the inside of, you have date, single tick, and then you have some stuff, and then there's a / single tick, some more stuff, and then if you're closing single tick, that the / single tick does not appear, only the tick after the / appears in the thing that is presented to whatever processes the date.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. Finally, the meatiest slide here. So there was a lot of discussion about non-ASCII characters. I think we're close to consensus here. There's some systems that might want an ASCII-only representation of EDN. I don't know. Maybe not. But certainly, both Christian and Joe, gave examples of places where it would be useful to be able to have, to be able to convert Unicode into some escaped representation automatically. And, there's my example, which is a particular mathematical C here and a C that's just been applied with a serif typeface and bold. Nobody's going to really notice the difference between those two. And so being able to say, hey, this one is a, either \u or a \u curly brace longer thing, that's useful to be able to say. And Christian said you should be able to machine process EDN to take all non-ASCII Unicode and turn it into ASCII. I think that's probably reasonable. I don't think anyone is objecting to that. Okay, so going to escaping. This is the big point that Joe made in his long document, is that there's no need for a globally defined \u encoding inside of extension app strings. Most extensions will either be using a restricted set. So, if we look at IP, date, ref, like these things all are using a limited set. They're using ASCII. Or if they don't, they're going to have one or more native extension mechanisms. Now, hypothetically, if you did have some system that didn't have a native encoding, well, you could, as the author of that extension, you could simply add the \u production yourself, and it would work. However, this means that machine processing of extensions that you didn't know you wouldn't be able to do. You'd be able to process them as shown on the next slide, but if you didn't understand a particular extension, you wouldn't be able to remove the ASCII from it correctly, but you could capture what it was in a tagged format and then process it in a way that was safe. Okay, and just here are a couple of examples, and I'm going to go to the next slide briefly. Okay, this is I asked Joe, if you could say one thing at the mic, what would it be? And he said this: any non-trivial format meant for text exchange will already have a Unicode escaping mechanism built into it. That is, the grammar will know how to process. Forcing it to use one will be confusing for existing users of that format. And specifically, the CBOR working group providing a new additional format is not just useless, but actively harmful, in his opinion. So here it is in the CRI case. Here is an example of the 3 native mechanisms that are already present that you could use to get rid of Unicode characters that are there. Christian.
Thanks. I think that's a great example because two-thirds of them are already wrong. The CRI xn-r sum-bpad is distinct from the CRI in the second level, which is the equivalent CRI, and the one in the first line is uses a completely different escaping mechanism. And I think that's way worse confusion than knowing that one is in a CBOR document, in an EDN document, and therefore there is some escaping. Languages that don't need that won't have it under the proposal of no over escaping. But relying on this forces the next language and the next language to go through their bespoke mechanisms rather than working as they can do in a binary file on Unicode.
So I'm not going to take a personal position on this, Christian, but I am going to go back to the slides that Karsten made that he presented earlier, or just before this slide deck went up, where he said basically they're going to be existing libraries that do things, and we don't want to constrain, unreasonably constrain what those libraries do. And so whether or not this example is correct, the fact that internationalized domain name processing, that percent encoding processing, and possibly even HTML entity processing could be occurring and fully supported by that library, and that library's default way of encoding could be one of these. I think that is an important reality that we need to keep in mind. I wouldn't go so far as to say that we're not, we shouldn't, that we cannot use a new mechanism. But I'm sympathetic to the argument of Joe's. Karsten.
We now have less than a minute left in this session. So
yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that the examples we are working with are all examples for things that have been heavily reviewed by the IETF, like the UI format. But this still violates a pretty important point about third-party extensibility. What you are saying says that a base function of the format, which is converting to the base repertoire, needs to be implemented by each of the extensions correctly.
I didn't say that. You said
for
that.
the thing to work.
You said that 15 minutes ago.
Yes, and that's why I don't think this slide is particularly useful.
Okay, we're going to have to cut the discussion off on this, I'm afraid. Christian, go ahead and say what you need to say, and then let's wrap it up.
Okay, just a brief remark. I'm totally fine with application-specific ASCIIfication happening. That's fine. It's just not something that people should be expected to do to provide.
Okay, let's. Sorry. I think we need to resume this discussion on the list and sort out what we're doing on the list because we're out of time in this session. So just very quickly, everybody check the dates on the. Check the dates on the interim calls. I will request them from the Secretariat, and I think next time I might ask for an hour-and-a-half session instead of an hour. I'm really sorry we didn't get to everything. It'll be on the list. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you. See you there.